Hey, and welcome back to Supernatural Signals, my haunted journal. This is going to be a place for me to sit down and talk openly and share the weird, unexplained things that have been happening lately or previously. So, again, this is no deep dive. It's just me and my thoughts and whatever the paranormal decides to throw my way this week or whatever I feel like discussing. I also will include updates to the channels and I also like to watch TV shows. So if something strikes me interesting about a show or I want to share a show that I'm enjoying, me and my boyfriend really like to um, binge watch a lot of shows. So we're kind of boring that way. So, um, you know, touch on those too. So it's just going to be kind of a plethora of me just chatting, but mainly focus on any paranormal updates or things that I've remembered from the past or want to just touch on briefly and not make a huge deep dive on that. So, yeah, so with that said, let's get into it. All right. So, as far as anything supernatural happening to me this week, there wasn't anything. I kind of had I had a week, let's just say, but nothing supernatural related, just a a week that kind of kept me distracted, I guess is the right word for it. And so if something did supernatural happen, I just was dealing with other things and um you know, uh life stuff. So no supernatural things happened, and which is good or bad of the way you look at it. But I did launch my video on the social work phantom episode, which I just released, and hopefully I can get this video up today too. Um, but there's two things I want to kind of touch on as far as supernatural. So the first thing is going to be quick. My last haunted journal episode, which I will link the series down below if you want to check out the previous episodes. Um um I mentioned that, you know, you can go listen to the story, but basically long story short is that like I was thinking about scanning something or thinking about how I could send out some documents and then all of a sudden the computer lit up and there was a green thing that said scan me, right? Well, I researched some more into the actual printer and the scanner and all that, and I might have an update next week about that, but I still want to like look into it and still kind of like reflect on it because I'm a little confused. So, and the thing about my channel is I want to be honest because I feel like with the supernatural, obviously there's a lot of fakes where it's like deliberately fake. They're trying to make like something spooky or whatever. And then there's people that are like generally confused, like, was this supernatural or was this not? And then there's just people like, yes, this was supernatural, right? There's so many like ways and so many people's different realities where it's like, I want to be as honest as possible with my stories. And with the computer thing, was 100% telling the truth, and I still 100% think something supernatural happened, but now I think it was even more supernatural than I thought it was. Um, so I'm gonna look into a little bit more and reflect on it and kinda try and figure out what's going on there, and hopefully get back next week with that, but I haven't really had the time to kinda, like, reflect on that. So I'm gonna put that on the back burner, but just know, like, when I tell you these stories, like, because I'm a skeptic in the sense of, like, you can't believe every story, and I understand people are gonna be skeptical of my stories, but just with my history, I do know there's supernatural things out there. I just like to have a viewpoint of advantage of, like, okay, what is actual supernatural and what is just a simple, like, thing. So just keep that in mind with my stories going forward. And I know it's kind of sounds backwards of me saying like, "No, this was extra supernatural now," but it's making me investigate it even more to be like, "Okay, either this is way more supernatural or it's I just the most dumbest person when it comes to technology." Let's put it that way. So I'm just trying to be honest with that, and then, I will have an update for that later on, going forward. So, okay, so that's what's going on, with that. But then I had another thought that I wanted to share on this channel. Okay, and so I just re-listened to that part that I just said. Sorry, this is a little off topic, but and I must have said like a million times, but this is what happens when I not like I said, I'm trying my best. This is my time to like get a flow going. All right. But this is what I really wanted to touch on. So I just made a video on the social workers, the phantom social workers, which I will link down below for you to check out if you're interested. And I enjoyed making that video. To be honest, I didn't get to do as much deep diving as I wanted to. But I still wanted to get it out. And honestly, there's really not a lot of information, right? It's just kind of like the same stories, kind of like different variations of the same stories that happening. But I do think it was interesting that, it involved people trying to get in contact with children. And I do believe it wasn't just them being creepy entities. I do think maybe there was something specific about the children that maybe the parents didn't even know about. And so that's kind of why I wanted to get into that video. But while I was making that video, it made me think of like one incident I had as a kid. And as a kid, I never thought this was supernatural. I just thought it was weird and I would joke about it with my friends. Um, but like I said, I was never really looking for supernatural stuff as a kid. And this I must have been like 13ish. It was definitely before I was 15. Probably like I would have to say like preteen, right? And th and so basically doing that video reminded me of this story. Long story short. What the story was I went to the mall and, with one of my friends, and her mom was gonna pick us up. So we were outside waiting, at the mall, as teens did, and was just hanging out, and we were just goofing around in the parking lot, and I was standing outside. And like how there was be like the grass mediums, like in between the parking lot areas. We were standing on one of those. I don't know the exact words for it, but we were just standing out there hanging out. And I looked around and I was kind of like hyper. So I was kind of like running, not running around, but just kind of like, I don't know, just being a kid or whatever. And, like, I turned, and I don't think my friend saw that, she was my friend at the time, I don't think she saw it, and it was just, like, one of those things that I saw and then it just kinda, like, computed in my head, and then I was like, "That was really weird," and I probably mentioned it a few times throughout my life, but it was never something I did a deep dive or, like, investigated. But, like, I turned around, and there was this guy, and he was wearing a suit, like a black suit with a long tie, and he had a briefcase, and he was, like, bald, and he had features, but they were very plain features, I don't remember, it was so long ago, I don't remember if he had, actual eyebrows, but, like, it was very, like he was, like, bald, and he was pale and just very, like, featureless is the best way I can describe it. But he was still, like, human. Like, if you saw him, you wouldn't be like, "Alien!" Like, you know what I mean? But he had very, like have you ever seen the meme where it's like, "You look easy to draw." He would be very easy to draw, let's put it that way, but I'm not gonna draw him because I can't draw, but you get what I'm saying. So, that is what I saw, and he was wearing a suit, and he had a briefcase, and the briefcase was kinda, like, towards the bottom of him, but he was, like, still holding it, like, down low, and he was, like, looking up, and he was, like, there, and I saw him, and I kinda stared. He didn't make eye contact with me, he was kinda, like, looking up, and then, like, 2 seconds later, our ride came, and again, like I said, he didn't do anything, but it was, like, you can tell he could tell I was looking at him, right? And so again, that would be, like, my only experience, and I didn't put in that video because I was already wrapping it up by the time I had that thought, which I don't know why I didn't have the thought before that, but he kinda gave me an eerie feeling, but not like a scared, feeling. So I don't think he would have been like an entity, like a phantom social worker that seemed to mean harm. I don't think he did. It just was very like he stood out, right? Like his outfit, even though it was like a business suit, it was like not something even for a businessman to wear, right? It was kind of like classy and like I don't want to say Men in Black to be cliche, but it was kind of like that, but even more like pristine. I don't know. So, um, yeah, so and it was a while ago, so if I don't remember all the details, I hope people understand that, but that's one of the stories that kinda struck me, and like I said, I didn't know anything really about the paranormal until I had my influx of paranormal activity a few years ago. So, it didn't really like, again, it was just like cliche thing, like, "That was kinda weird," and moved along, you know what I mean? Um, but yeah. So, other than that, that's all I kind of really wanna touch base on is supernatural as far as, like, experiences. But the other thing I like to do is, like, obviously, my channel originated, like, trying to, like, look at a show and then incorporate it into, a supernatural topic. But sometimes when I watch shows, just to watch them and, like, without any purposes and just found it interesting, like, I'll find something that I'm like, "Huh, that makes sense," like, how you can relate it to the supernatural even though it has nothing to do with the supernatural, and I don't know if anyone else does that, but me and my boyfriend recently just randomly started watching a show the other day, um, and it's called Light and Magic. It's a docuseries, and it goes over, how people made films, like, it's like George Lucas, where how they made films like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and kind of like those big films, kind of like really starting the um, trend with making, or using rather special effects and, like, having special effects become a big, aspect in movies, right? And it's a really interesting show, just in perspective of, like, producing what they have to go through and, like, just the dynamics of it and things like that. And so we started watching that, and, I think it was because I was also really fascinated about the fact with the social worker, phantoms of how, like, their calm demeanor and, like but also being, like calm demeanor as well as being, like, pushy at the same time, but not using, like, force, but, like, using an authoritative body language and things like that. It kinda, like, was making me think about, like, comforting things, right? Because it was just, like, talking about how, like, certain things I don't know. We're not gonna get into that. But that's where it kinda, like, where my thought process was going, right? And so, I was thinking about that, and then I there was this one guy, and I forget his name, but he was one of the main people that are talking in the docuseries, and he's discussing about how, like, sometimes what he does is really repetitive as far as, like, creating the models, right? And so, like, he'll have to, like, do this part and this part over and over again, and some of his friends, like, are like, "Don't you get bored? Don't you get bored doing that? Like, isn't that too repetitive? Like, you're a creative guy," or whatever. I'm assuming they said that, like, just kinda, like, saying, like, you have to keep doing something over and over again to create the model, right? And he's a really creative guy, but that's just part of his job as well, and he said, "Actually, no, because it actually kept me from" and I don't wanna say the word, but, like, hurting himself permanently, because sorry, I'm not trying to make light of that, I just don't wanna use that word, right? But, thing because he dealt with depression and he dealt with, you know, just, like a lot of, I think, creative people in general, like, deal with that where it's just like, they struggled with that, right? And he was in deep depression, but him doing that, he said it was almost a form of meditation, right? And it got me thinking, right, where it's like we have these things now on social media where people create Legos, and I like to do Legos, or people like to crochet, like repetitive things like that, right? Where you're building blocks or drawing or doodling and things like that. And it kind of made me think like, I kind of feel like nowadays we have those ways of doing those repetitive things without even like realizing that, you know what I mean? Like, I almost feel like it's a coping mechanism for daily life, where that guy was explaining, like, his modeling things, he's like, "That saved my life." Like, it got me to meditate, and it just made me kinda think in the supernatural, obviously, there's gonna be high stress situations where you have to deal with people that are, like, phantom social workers or people that have that authoritative or scare you or make you uneasy, and having that escapism like Legos or repetitive things or watching ASMR videos really is a way to meditate without actually realizing it, right? It's just like, "Oh, I wanna make this cool block," and all of a sudden, you're doing something over and over again, and it clears your mind, right? And I don't know. I know that doesn't really thing, but I don't know if anyone's ever kind of like thought like, why do I gravitate to this or something like that? But I just thought that was really interesting because again, next time people mention that, maybe like, it's my meditation time, it's my time to turn off my brain and just focus on something that is not everything around me. Because I do think, humans need that not only just for daily life, but if you are into like the supernatural world or the supernatural is attracted to you, I think that's a good form of meditation. I don't know. I know that sounds bizarre, but just with my experiences, I kind of correlated that with that. So, um, but yeah. So, but anyway, if you're looking for a good show to watch, it's really good. It starts with kind of like the history of Star Wars and George Lucas, and it kind of goes in the dynamics and the fights behind the scenes, and then the budget problems they have to go through, and all these things just to make these movies work. And like, yeah, it's really, really interesting, and it's really, good watch. So it's on Disney Plus if you're interested. So anyway, I'm gonna close this out. I think I rambled enough. Like I said, I'm gonna leave this raw just for now. Later on, I'll probably have these videos a little bit more structured, but this is also kind of just me practicing communicating with the world because if you can't tell, I'm working on that. So, anyway, thank you for watching. If you have any stories or any thoughts about anything I discussed, please let me know. There's one person that left a comment on my solder video that I really appreciated. And I think maybe on another haunted journal, when I have time to explore what she added, because she added a lot to the content I put it out, I might explore that as well and do a follow up. For one of these journals as well. So I think that will also be a good use for these journals, is to do any follow-ups that maybe commenters brought up, and I can like look into it later on. So, but with that said, thank you for watching. I hope everyone is having a good weekend, and um, just make sure you stay curious and stay tuned into the supernatural. Have a good day. Bye.